I'm Eddie Muller, welcoming you to another episode of TCM's Noir Alley. This week we've got a terrific picture, one that's been inexplicably relegated to obscurity. It's The Mob, a 1951 offering from Columbia Pictures starring Broderick Crawford. To me, Broderick Crawford might be the most unlikely leading man of all time. He'd been making movies since 1937, almost always cast as a gruff, fast-talking cop or crook. Then in 1949, director Robert Rossen cast Crawford as Willie Stark, the principal role in his adaptation of the Pulitzer Prize-winning novel All the King's Men. It won the Academy Award for Best Picture, and Crawford took home a Best Actor Oscar for his performance. Overnight, Broad was big box office. Despite the Oscar win, Prestige Films proved a tough fit for Crawford's on-screen persona. Columbia was more comfortable casting him in things like Cargo to Cape Town, a manly seafaring yarn, and Convicted, a prison picture with Glenn Ford. The studio then cast him as gruff, fast-talking Harry Brock in the big hit Born Yesterday, pushing aside Paul Douglas, who'd created the role on Broadway. The pedigree of his pictures might change, but Crawford always played the same pit bull in a china shop. With a face like a boiled potato and a voice like gargled gravel, it was amazing he got starring roles. For this picture, the studio surrounded Crawford with a supporting cast of plug uglies that makes the leading man look like Clark Gable. Well, not really, but there are a lot of rough-looking dudes in this movie. If you haven't seen this picture before, you may be surprised by its similarity to a much more famous film, On the Waterfront, which would be made at Columbia 3 years later. Both concern gangland corruption of the New York Dock Workers Union, where Bud Schulberg's story focuses on the moral quandaries facing Teamster Terry Malloy. The Mob follows an undercover cop, that's Crawford, on his dangerous infiltration of the New York underworld. The actor looks right at home on the docks. He'd worked as a stevedore after dropping out of Harvard in his first semester. The film is based on a book called, fittingly enough, Waterfront by Ferguson Finley, the pen name of Charles Weiser Fry, who wrote half a dozen crime novels in the early 50s, including one called Murder Makes Me Mad. And while the plot is more than serviceable with some terrific twists and turns, what makes all the difference on screen is the dialogue supplied by screenwriter William Bowers. Regular viewers of Noir Alley have heard me speak many times of Bowers as one of the MVPs of the genre. Directors would line up to have him give their scripts a dusting of his magic language before taking it in front of the cameras. The Mob is a bit talkier than the average crime picture, but when it's Bill Bowers supplying the slang being slung, no complaints. Bowers had previously worked with director Robert Parrish on the Dick Powell picture Cry Danger, released earlier in 1951. Parrish was lucky to have Bowers write his first two pictures. Not that the director was a tyro. He'd been working in Hollywood since he was a boy, acting in films like Sunrise, All Quiet on the Western Front, and City Lights. He literally grew up in the business and tackled every aspect of movie making in his youth. Sound editor, second unit director, and AD, before winning an Oscar as a full-fledged editor for the sensational 1947 boxing drama Body and Soul, directed by Robert Rossen. Parrish's editing was credited with rescuing All the King's Men when Rossen shot more footage than he knew what to do with. By the time he made The Mob, Parrish definitely knew what he was doing, and he and Bill Bowers made a terrific team. In fact, Bowers was something of a good luck charm for Parrish, who brought him on to write the final drafts of his next two films, The San Francisco Story and Assignment Paris. As I mentioned earlier, brace yourselves for some menacing mugs. Ernest Borgnine, Neville Brand, John Marley, and Charles Bronson all loom heavily at the dawn of what would be very long careers. In fact, 7 years down the road, Neville Brand would play Willie Stark, the role that made Broderick Crawford a star, in a television version of All the King's Men. Also featuring Richard Kiley, Lynn Baggett, and German-born actress Betty Bueller in one of her few film roles, here is a trim and tidy precursor to On the Waterfront, The Mob.